a.m. in the car playing our favorite song. Turn it up, windows down, we sing along. The summer night has just begun. The moon is bright, let's have some fun. Oh, this is everything, with you right next to me. So alive, and tonight I'm thinking that I don't wanna go. Calling sick in the morning, baby don't leave. They don't need to know we're out here wild and free. They say we're crazy, it's too much. And yeah, we're crazy, deep in love. Oh, this is everything, with you right next to me. So alive, and tonight I'm thinking that I don't wanna go. This is everything, with you right next to me. So alive, and tonight I'm thinking that I don't wanna go. This is everything, with you right next to me. So alive, and tonight I'm thinking that I don't wanna go.
Cold. All right, guys, we're talking the R6 today. It has been a good year for cameras. There's so many different options out there. There's the R5, there's the A7S III coming out, the red Komodo that is like, I think, impossible to get, but some people have it somehow. And there's this unspoken R6. It's not totally unspoken, but I don't hear too many people talking about it. And it's actually a really good camera. Now, there are some negatives to the camera, but before we get into that, I want to dive into the things that I actually really like about this camera. Now, first things first, I'm really loving the image quality of this camera. The 5K downsample to 4K looks incredible. Even the 1080p looks a whole lot better than my previous EOS R. And the EOS R was known for having really good 1080p. So just right off the bat, this image quality is so good. I have no words to describe how happy I am with the image quality. The 10-bit 422 makes color grading a breeze, and yeah, the image quality is a A+ in my book. Now we pretty much have 4K at full frame. It crops in slightly. I believe it's like 1.07 time crop, and it really, you can't tell the difference. It's like the most smallest crop ever. It's not a big deal. You're pretty much getting full frame 4K, which is a big step up from the previous EOS R, where it had a huge crop. I don't remember what the exact crop was, but it was huge. It was like 1.6 or something like that. So big step up for that. It actually makes the 4K really usable in this camera. And from what I experienced, the low light actually is quite good on this camera as well. I don't know if it has something to do with the lower megapixels, where this has 20 megapixels, where the R5 has like 45 megapixels. And I know I've seen some tests between the two, and this one has an edge over the R5 in low light conditions. And I don't know, I've cranked the shutter pretty high. I never really go above 1200, and I brought it to 1600, and I didn't really experience any kind of grain or anything, where if I were to do that on my EOS R, I would see a lot of that film grain, or that noise, that staticky stuff. I'd see a lot of that on my EOS R, where I'm actually not seeing that on my R6. So the low light seems pretty good. Obviously, it's probably not up to Sony standards yet, but it's getting there. I'm really liking the low light on this camera. The next thing I've been really liking is the dual SD card slots. Having 2 SD cards comes in clutch so often, especially since I only have 2 64 gig cards. So putting them together basically makes me have like one 128 gig card. Although the file sizes aren't that big even when I'm shooting in 4K because it only shoots IPB, which we'll get into in a little bit. And so it comes in clutch. It's come in clutch quite a bit. So dual SD card slots is a plus. On my old EOS R, it had a top-down screen, and the R5 as well has a top-down screen. Now this actually has a mode dial, which I've actually found that I prefer now. Before I was like, oh, that's kind of a downer, has a mode dial, doesn't have the top-down screen, but I actually never used the top-down screen on my EOS R. I know to some people that may be handy and they might use it a lot more than I ever did, but I actually prefer the mode dial because it's just easy. Swap over to telephoto, swap over to video, and that's that. So I guess it depends. To some people that may be a positive, and some people that may be a negative. To me, I've actually found that I prefer it. Instead of hitting mode, then select, then selecting what camera thing I wanted on the EOS R, this is just a whole lot faster and more efficient, in my opinion. Now the joystick and the scroll wheel is just mwah. Nothing else to say about it. Chef's kiss, mwah. Mwah, mwah. I love it, it's great. It's way better than the slidey thing on the EOS R that I've never once used. I just found it to be a complete inconvenience. Totally love the joystick, so yeah, don't gotta worry about that thing. The IBIS, I'm loving the IBIS. I actually did a stabilization test, so go ahead and check that out real quick. So personally, I actually leave any of the electronic stabilization. I just leave that off. I keep my lens stabilization on and IBIS. That's all I use. And personally, I find that to be perfect because the electronic stabilization, it crops in. If you go onto normal or enhanced, it even crops in even more. So I just keep those off and I just rely on the IBIS, and it's been working pretty good, in my opinion. I've done a vlog test that you can check out here. I don't remember what side it comes up on. And yeah, get a feel for what it looks like when you're vlogging with this camera. Now let's talk about the juicy topic that everybody talks about, that it's just gone so stale. Nobody wants to talk about it anymore, but we gotta talk about it. The overheating. And this camera has overheated on me I'm kidding. This camera has not overheated once on me. Now, before I go any further, I did get the camera with the most recent firmware update, which I believe is 1.1, something like that. So I'm gonna guess that the firmware update really improved the overheating in this camera. I have not had an overheat warning once, and I've been shooting 4K 60, 4K 24, 1080p 120. I don't know if that'll make it overheat, but I've been shooting that nonstop all day. I've put this camera through the ringer today, and not one overheating warning or anything has ever come up. Now you do see your record limit, your record time. It does go down gradually, but I would just turn the camera off and walk around for like maybe 5-10 minutes, and my timer would go back up. And it fluctuated throughout the day, but it was never anything below 15 minutes. So I don't know, maybe I just have like the best R6 out there, but I have not had this thing overheat once. And yeah, I'm really surprised. I'm really happy about that, because before I got this camera, that's all I heard was the R5 and the R6, they're overheating. They're just, you can't rely on them. They're not good cameras because they overheat. And lo and behold, I have not overheated this camera once. So I'm super happy with that. Now, I'll be shooting all kinds of R6 stuff, and we'll see if we run into it in the future. If you want to know, just go ahead and hit that subscribe button and hit the bell for notifications, and yeah, you know, all that stuff. Okay, let's talk about 120 frames per second in 1080p. It's being squashed down and like just put into a little mouse hole because of the epic 4K 120 on the R5, which not downplaying the R5's 4K 120 at all. This 1080p 120 is still really good, and when I upscale it to 4K, it fits in with all my 4K footage. So it's really not to be just stepped upon. Stepped upon? Shouldn't be looked down upon. All right, if that didn't make any sense to you, essentially, it looks really good in my opinion. Yes, it's not the 4K 120 from the R5, but when I upscale it to 4K, it looks great. Now, let me show you some example shots of 1080p 120. Alright, so I hope you like watching my son eating Cheetos, his little Cheeto things at 120 frames per second. He's so cute, I love him. Alright guys, let's get into the negatives, the downside, about this camera. The biggest negative of this camera is no all-eye codec. Come on Canon, we need all-eye. Now it's not the biggest deal. IPB still looks really great, especially when you have 10-bit 422 internal. The camera, the quality looks amazing. But with IPB, if you're moving the camera fast, especially like in areas where there's lots of trees and bushes, sometimes you'll get a lot of artifacts pop up and it doesn't look good. So I believe that's where all-eye comes in, and all-eye kind of removes any of that kind of problem. So I believe the community needs to make their voice heard about this. Otherwise, I don't think Canon's gonna change anything. Now, there has been rumors of an all-eye firmware coming in a firmware update, but it hasn't been officially announced, and you know, they might not change anything if the community doesn't say anything. So I think the community needs to step up and say, you know, we need all-eye in this camera, especially a camera that costs this much. My EOS R had all-eye, and this R6 is twice as much here in Australia, and it's lacking the all-eye. So I believe that's kind of unacceptable, and that needs to be brought back in a firmware update. So as a community, let's make our voices heard, and let's get that all-eye back in this camera. It's not the biggest deal. The footage still looks great. Don't let that stop you from getting this camera. Because I know initially when I heard that about the R6, I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to get it. But the image quality that I've gotten out of this thing, I'm really loving it. And you know, IPB is not all that bad. the file sizes are a lot smaller than all-eye, so it's been really good for my smaller SD cards that I have. So yeah, there's a positive and a negative to, you know, IPB. Some people shoot IPB all the time and they don't even worry about all-eye. But I know there's a lot of people out there that really prefer all-eye. So bring it back, Canon. Now, even though this camera hasn't overheated on me yet, I'll still put it as a negative because it still has the potential to overheat. Now, I know there's a lot of cameras out there that, you know, do overheat, but I'll just put it there just so you guys know it still has the potential to overheat. Now, I've used it extensively, you know, on and off, and haven't had any overheating, but it still has that potential of overheating. So to maybe help that, if you're shooting really long form content, like not stopping the camera whatsoever, maybe get an external monitor. I know there's a couple hacks you can do, which I don't know if that's the greatest thing for your camera. It might ruin it, so I don't recommend that. But there are things to improve the record limit on this camera. Now, on top of the mode dial, we have the C1, C2, and C3 modes. And unfortunately, I could not find any way to access a video mode in any of those options, so that could be a downside. I know that's a big deal to some people. Personally, I just shoot manual. I've never used any of those, but I know that can be a big negative for some people maybe that's another thing that they can bring back in a firmware update. So let's push them to add that back into the camera. And I believe that's really all the negatives I've experienced so far with this camera. I've had a lot more positives. I'm actually really stoked with this camera. I believe it's been really just overshadowed by its big brother, the R5. And this camera shouldn't be slept on. It's actually quite an incredible camera. It essentially has almost all the same features as the R5. It's just missing that 45 megapixels, the 8K mode, the downsampled 8K, and 4K 120. Besides that, it actually shoots better 4K than your standard 4K on the R5, because the R6 only has 5K downsampled 4K. So you're actually getting an overall better image in traditional 4K. So yeah, don't let this camera be slept on. It's incredible. I mean, it's by no means cheap, but it's doable. It's doable. It's a lot cheaper than its R5 counterpart. All right, guys, that's gonna wrap up my initial R6 review. Now, if you wanna see any follow-up videos on this camera, make sure to hit the subscribe button, hit the bell, comment down below what other things you might like to see regarding this camera. And guys, remember, there are so many different cameras out there. You don't have to go with this one. You can go with whatever camera you want, but we need to remember that gear isn't the first most important thing. It's our storytelling and our creativeness inside. So don't let gear consume your creative nature. Make sure to just go out and create. Even if you don't have any of these new cameras, just get out there, go and shoot with what you have. And if the opportunity arises to get one of these new cameras, then go for it. All right, guys, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Peace.